Last week, I started looking at some of the passages in the Bible, some of the phrases in the Bible, some of the verses in the Bible that speak of, that refer to the law that are often misunderstood. And last week we looked at the subject of what is righteousness. And, the main point of what I tried to say last week was that people misunderstand what righteousness is, and so they misunderstand how to obtain righteousness. So many times you find that one wrong idea leads to another wrong idea until you end up with a bag of errors. And it started because of one simple wrong turn, which is why, foundations are very important. By the way, in case I forget, there's a special song I want to play at the end. And if I forget, please remind me, because that's one of the consequences of being 71. I sometimes forget, but please remind me if I forget. Um, so today, I want to look at another phrase in the Bible that is very often misunderstood, another phrase relating to the law. And I think most of us are familiar with what I want to share, but I hope to reinforce these ideas. I know that this morning we have a congregation of over 100 people. And what I find, and all of us can recognize this, is that some of us, we grasp ideas very quickly. And some folks, they come along a little more slowly. And some grasp one idea and some find it a little more difficult to grasp another idea. So it's always good for us to reinforce and to make sure that everybody is moving along at the same rate. Last week I was so glad when Brother Sam said that, he had come to understand. And then he gave us evidence of his understanding. I know because he was one person who had a difficulty understanding sometimes when I spoke about the law. So it was very gratifying for me when I heard him say that he had come to understand fully. But I just use that as an example to say we always have to move along at a speed where the like when Moses was going through the wilderness, he told his father-in-law Jethro that he had to travel at a speed where the children could keep up and the old people could keep up. You can't just take the warriors and run ahead, because then we're not a church made up just of the strong. We're made up of the weak and the slow and the old and those who are not as sharp. And we're carrying everybody along, and we're going to reach our destination tomorrow together. Maybe tomorrow would be nice. Together. We're not leaving anybody behind. So if it means going along slowly and going back over stuff, we're going to do that. So anyway, all of this preamble because I'm trying to justify the fact that I'm going to talk today again about what it means to be under the law. What does it mean to be under the law? And I will of course operate using my PowerPoint as the basis of my presentation. Let me see if I can get this right. All right, let me see if I get this right. Okay, great, great. All right, under the law. I'm using the new GoToMeeting. I'm just getting used to it. It's different from what I'm accustomed to, so I have to go along a little slowly at times. So you have to bear with me, brothers and sisters. It shows up a little differently on my screen. I can't see what I used to see sometimes. Sometimes I see a bit more, sometimes less. So I have to get used to it. So under the law, the verse I want us to begin with is this verse from Romans 6 and verse 14. It says, "For sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law, but under grace." The reason why I'm starting with this verse is because it's the verse that is used most popularly to counter those who believe in the eternity of the law. All right. they compare these two things, under the law and under grace, and they say, we're not under the law, we're under grace. And the Bible says it. Paul says it right here very clearly in Romans 6 and verse 14. So it's not something we can deny, nor is it something we should want to deny. It's fact. It's there in the scripture, as clear as the nose on our faces. But what we need to do is, as always, we need to rightly divide the word of truth. What does it mean to be under the law? It's true, but how do we understand it? That is the question. Now, I have labeled this a misunderstood statement because I believe that it is misunderstood on two sides of the fence. There are those who are law keepers who badly misunderstand it, and there are those who reject the keeping of the law, let me put it that way, who also badly misunderstand it. Now, the first opinion is from those who say that the law has been abolished. They interpret this verse to mean that it is no longer necessary to keep the law. They interpret it to mean that the law has been abolished. We're not under the law has been abolished. In this kind of thinking, there is something wrong with the law. What is the problem? The problem is the law. And how do I come to that conclusion? Because if the solution, if not being under the law, when it says we are not under the law, if it means that the law has been abolished, then it means that something is wrong with the law. The only time you abolish something is when the thing has a fault, it has a flaw, there's a problem with it. So you abolish it, you get rid of it, it no longer applies, it's no longer relevant, it's no longer in effect. And that is how some people understand this, that the law has been abolished. And so you end up with the conclusion that something is wrong with the law. You think that God gave the Hebrews something, but there was something wrong with the law itself. So this is the first opinion, and I call it the first opinion. Maybe it's not the first in terms of the first idea that came up about this verse, but it's the first one that is introduced to most people. They believe that it means that the law has been abolished. It's first because the majority of Christians in the world, by far the majority, tend to interpret it in this way. The second opinion, and this now is the opinion of those who are law keepers, and primarily those who are Sabbath keepers. And of course, you know, the biggest group in this connection is Seventh-day Adventists. They believe the law is not abolished. Maybe they are right. I tend to agree with them. The law is not abolished. But they think it means that we are no longer under the law's condemnation. The other word, okay? The verse says we are not under the law. They say we are not under the law's condemnation. They add a little something to what is said, and they say that's what it means, under the condemnation of the law. And I'm hoping that the illustrations are helping us to understand. To be condemned by the law means that you are guilty, means that the law has the right to come and arrest you, bring you under its condemnation. I think there's somebody who is loose. Let me see if I can mute everybody. And again, I really have to go back to my, well, okay. All right, I have to get used to it. But it takes me a while to figure my way out in the new GoToMeeting. We're no longer under its condemnation. In this opinion, what is the problem? The problem is our state. And when I say our state, the problem is our condemned state. All right. I don't mean the problem is our bodies or our human condition. The problem is the fact that we are condemned. Our guilty state. All right. The problem is our guilt. So if the problem is guilt, the solution will be a way to eliminate guilt. Let me go back a little bit to the previous screen and look at what, if the law was the problem, if the law was the problem, in the first opinion, if the law was the problem, something was wrong with the law, then the way you deal with the problem is that you abolish the law, then you solve the problem. Okay? In this second opinion, the problem is the condemnation brought by the law. So how do you solve the problem? You need to find a way to release the condemnation or to release the guilt. So in this thinking, you solve the problem of being under the law by being pardoned. You are forgiven by God through the blood of Christ. You are pardoned. And that is what it means that you are no longer under the law. You are delivered from under the law because you have been pardoned. This is beautiful if it were true. This depends upon you thinking that being under the law means being under the law's condemnation. Then if you are delivered from the law, you are delivered from condemnation. The problem is condemnation. That's what you are looking for, a way to be free from condemnation. All right? And so this is the conclusion of most Sabbath keeping law keepers, right? That you are free from the condemned state. That way they can hold on to the idea that we are still the law is still not abolished, the law is still relevant, but we are no longer under the law because we are no longer condemned by the law. This may be how many of us understand this issue, and I'm going to say to you today that based on the Bible, if this is what you believe, it is wrong, it is false. It is not what the Bible means when it says we are under the law and we are no longer under the law. Listen to what Paul says in Romans 7 and verse 6. And this new GoToMeeting, the problem is I can't see my screen and see all of you at the same time, and that gives me a little bit of a discomfort because I like to see you when I'm talking. But anyway, let me continue. Next time I'm going back to the old one. It says, now we are delivered from the law. All right, so all right, Paul says we are delivered. Okay, we are set free. The word delivered is used when you find yourself in some kind of bondage, some kind of captivity. And Paul says we are delivered from the law. It's the law that we are free from. The problem, the thing that has us in bondage or captivity is the law. Now we are delivered from it. But how are we delivered? He says that being dead, wherein we were held. We were held by something. And that thing that held us is dead. That thing that held us is dead. And because it is dead, we are now delivered, so that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. So let me just highlight the point here. The point is we are delivered from the law and we are delivered by death. The thing that delivers us is death. Make a note of this. We're not delivered by forgiveness. We're not delivered by forgiveness. We are delivered by death. So the idea that under the law means to be under the condemnation, and therefore when we are delivered, it means that the condemnation is taken away because we are forgiven. That is a false idea. I said that is a false idea. And that's what I'm reinforcing. According to Paul, it's not forgiveness that delivers us. Maybe I should change my highlighter color. It's not forgiveness that delivers us. It's death that delivers us from the law. So we are not talking about condemnation is not a problem. It's something else. Now, I believe that both of the ideas that we looked at, the idea that says that the law is abolished is wrong. The idea that says that we are under the law means to be under the law's condemnation, that also is wrong. Both of these ideas, they are the popular ideas, and both of them are wrong. I'm going to say that first before I prove that to you using the same scriptures. So it's important that we understand it, because the problem with false ideas is that they set us off walking on the wrong pathway, and one wrong conclusion leads to another wrong conclusion until we find ourselves far from the truth and wrapped up in nonsense, and we don't even know how we got there. And the worst part is that we now believe that the nonsense is the truth. That is a problem. And so we worship God in a confused way that is not pleasing to Him, that is not helpful to us, that does not cause us to grow, and may even cause us to lose our way eventually. That's why it's important that we understand the truth. We study the scriptures and hear what the scriptures say and not what people say to us. You know, this is one of the things that probably is so important. The real reason for all these false doctrines is that people obtain their religious ideas from other people, from denominations, from groups, from movements, and they don't study for themselves. I know that in saying this, somebody might ask the question, are you not condemning yourself? You're also sharing with people, and you're also expecting people to believe what you say. And this is true. But what I want to emphasize, and I have emphasized and I always will emphasize, is that everybody who listens to what I have to say should go to the Bible. At least we try to go through the Bible together. Everything that I'm saying to you week after week, one of the things that I am happy for is that I go Bible. I don't take one verse and just preach 1 hour on the one verse, like a lot of places you can find. We go verse by verse, point by point, principle by principle, and then hopefully everybody goes back and re-examines to see if you have been misled or are being led astray. I should hope that is what everybody does. And those who communicate with me, I know that's what you do. Most of you are here because you turned away from some false system or some false doctrine, and because of this, you are the people who naturally you are sensitive to examine things, and I appreciate that. Sometimes we end up in places where we disagree. I know we don't agree on everything. Sometimes you see things one way and I see things another way, and that is all right because we are not clone stamping people. But what I would say is that when a person examines the Bible with an open mind, directed by the Spirit of God, with an honest heart, usually that person, I would say always, that person will come to understand the truths that are vital. And if not immediately, then God will certainly lead you step by step to that place. That's how He works. So, let's continue. We are delivered by death, not by forgiveness. Now, Paul uses a statement. Paul uses this statement under the law in Galatians 4, in verse 21. And I want you to look at how he uses it. He's talking to the Galatians and he says, "Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law?" Now, I've used an umbrella to illustrate what Paul is saying, because as we proceed, you will see that this idea is kind of the idea he's getting at. This idea of being under one covering. Now, Paul talks about the Galatians and he says, you desire, you are wanting to be under the law. Now look at the phrase under the law. This is the phrase we are examining. Under the law. Paul says that the Galatians were wanting to be under the law. Now think of the two ideas that we looked at earlier on. Were they wanting to be condemned by the law? There's no rational person who sets out to seek for condemnation. Nobody sets out, if he has any sense at all, nobody sets out to deliberately seek to be condemned. Could you excuse me just 1 second? My fan, I need it. Sorry guys, I'm getting warm. Nobody sets out to be condemned. So we can eliminate the idea that it means condemnation. When Paul talks about being under the law, he does not mean being condemned, because he says to the Galatians, you are desiring, you are looking, you're wanting to be under the law. They were not wanting to be condemned by the law. Okay, so that takes care of that one. But if you remember the story of the Galatians, what did they want to do? They wanted to be circumcised, and they wanted to go back to the rituals and the ceremonies of the law. And when Paul saw this, Paul says, you desire to be under the law. You're really wanting to be under the law. And let me clear this. This is an illustration of what the Galatians were after. If we look at the umbrella as the law, all right, they're under the law, under the umbrella. This is more what Paul means when Paul says you're not under the law, but you're wanting to be under the law. One person is under the umbrella. That person is under the law. And the other person is not under the umbrella. That person is no longer under the law. So it's where you are in relation to the law. Now, there are two things about the law. I may not talk about this as much today, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Two things about the law. First of all, there's the law itself, which is the umbrella. And secondly, there's the effect of the law. All right, we have put these two lines is where the effect of the law is taking place. All right, the effect of the law is that you are under that no rain is touching you when you're under the umbrella. The way the law works is that the law is an entity like the umbrella, and the effect of the law, according to what one of the opinions we looked at earlier on, to be not to be under the condemnation of the law, what these folks are saying is that you are under the effects of the law, right? The effect of the umbrella here is that you are being sheltered from the rain, okay? So the effect of the umbrella, and what they were saying is that you are no longer under the effect of the law. The law in this case would be the commandments, and the effect of the commandment would be that you are condemned. So the umbrella is the law, is the commandments, and the shelter is the condemnation. I'm trying to equate both things. I'm using an illustration, and I want you to understand what the illustration is saying. The effect of the umbrella would be the condemnation. It would be the effect that you get when you're under the law. So what Adventists say, what law keepers would say is that you are still under the umbrella. You are still under the umbrella, but the effect of the umbrella, you have been delivered from the effect because you have been forgiven. So it's the effect that was a problem. It was not where you were standing. Now somebody is standing outside of the umbrella, and obviously this person outside of the umbrella is not feeling the effects of the umbrella, but neither is she under the umbrella. Not under the umbrella and not feeling the effects of the umbrella. The one under the umbrella is getting both things, under the umbrella and also feeling the effects of the umbrella. The one on the outside has been delivered from both the umbrella and the effects of the umbrella. Now I'm going to come back to this a little later on. I just want you to keep this picture in your mind because it relates to how we understand this. But anyway, let's continue. Paul says if you are led of the Spirit, Paul says if you are led of the Spirit, you are not under the law. So if we look at our illustration, what he's saying is that once you are led by the Spirit, you are standing where this lady is standing. If the umbrella is the law and the shelter is the effects of the law, if you are led by the Spirit, you are neither under the umbrella, neither are you feeling the effects of the umbrella. Both things are eliminated in your experience. That's what Paul is saying. If you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now, the reasons for the misunderstanding, there are three reasons that I would say. Maybe there are more, but there are three outstanding ones. Number one is a faulty understanding of what the law is. There are many people who don't know what the law is, even though they read it in the Bible. Secondly, it's a faulty understanding of the purpose of the law. And thirdly, of course, is a faulty understanding of the gospel. But all of these are tied together. If you don't know what the law is, you don't understand the purpose of the law. And of course, you won't understand the gospel. So we're going to take a quick look at these things. I know that we started late today, and well, it's a changing time in time. Most of us might have a little extra time, but I don't want to overdo things. So we'll take it at a pace that we can manage. I hope I won't be too long. But we want to look at these three things and see how they tie together with what we have been looking at. So first of all, what was the law? Paul says in Romans 7 and verse 7, what shall we say then? Is the law sin? Notice he's talking about the law. God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law. He's talking about the law. For I had not known lust except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. So clearly, Paul is speaking about the law here. And how does he define the law? There's no question when you look at it that he's speaking about the Ten Commandments, because as you look at the commandments, even this picture of the commandments, you'll see that commandment number 10 says, thou shalt not covet. Okay? So when Paul says, I would not have known lust except by the law, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet, Paul is referring to the Ten Commandments as the law. No question, no reasonable question. So Paul calls the Ten Commandments the law. And in actual fact, that is what most people believe, and it's correct. The problem is, like with many things, that is all that some people know. They accept this, but it's not false information, but it is limited information. And sometimes that can be almost as dangerous as false information. Let's proceed. In Psalm 82 and verse 6, we read a verse, a strange verse. God is speaking through the psalmist, and God says, I have said, you are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. Obviously, he's speaking about the Israelites. And God said, I have said, you are gods. God has referred to the Israelites as being gods. Strange, but anyway, it's what happened. Jesus comes, and in John 10 and verse 34, Jesus quotes from what was written in the Psalms. And Jesus says, Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods? Notice he's quoting exactly directly from the book of Psalms. Go back and read from Genesis to Malachi to find this phrase. You are gods. And the only place you'll find it is in Psalm 82 and verse 6. Jesus was quoting from Psalm 82 and verse 6. But notice what Jesus says. It is written where? It is written in your law. Jesus is referring to the book of Psalms as your law. So the Psalms are also regarded as being a part of the law. If you don't understand this, there's a lot in the New Testament that is confusing that you won't understand. Of course, somebody who is being technical will say, but notice Jesus said your law. It's not God's law, it's the law of the Jews. Well, there are some people who are technical like that. And so maybe we should move a little further before we settle on this idea. But bear that in mind. In Exodus 34 and verse 19, we find where God says, all that openeth the matrix is mine. And he's really referring to the firstborn. All that openeth the matrix is mine. The matrix is a cervix, the womb. When he says openeth the matrix, he's talking about the firstborn. All that openeth the matrix is mine, and every firstling among thy cattle, whether ox or sheep, that is male, every firstborn male, God is saying, is mine. In Luke 2 and verse 23, look at what it says. As it is written in where? The law of the Lord. So if you got away with the previous verse, you can't get away with this one. In the previous one, Jesus said it is written in your law. And somebody might have said, well, that was the law of the Jews. But this is speaking in the same New Testament and it is written in the law of the Lord. It's referring to Exodus 34 and verse 19. It's referring to the rule that the firstborn was to be given to the Lord. And this rule is called the law of the Lord. It is written, every male that openeth the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. He's quoting from the same place. And it is referred to as the law of the Lord. Okay, so this one makes it clear that the law of the Lord is not just the Ten Commandments. No, no, there's more to it. The rules given to Moses, not just the Ten Commandments, the other rules that were given to Moses were also referred to as the law. And in case you never saw this before, make a note of the reference. Luke chapter 2 and verse 23. We go again in the same chapter, same passage, but we go to the verse that follows. We read again. And when the days of her purification according to the law of Moses were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male that openeth the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. But now the other part that I didn't quote earlier on. And to offer a sacrifice according to that which is written, to that which is said in, there you go again, in the law of the Lord. A pair of turtle doves or two young pigeons. So clearly, Luke 2 verses 22 and to 24 declares that the laws concerning the offering of sacrifices, the rules concerning the law of sacrifices, these also were referred to as the law. So somebody who says that the Ten Commandments were the law and they were the law of the Lord, period, you probably need to go back and read your Bible more carefully. Here in Luke, the law of the Lord is referred to as what we would call the ceremonial laws and the sacrificial laws. They are also included in what we call the law of the Lord. So what was the law? Well, first of all, it was the Ten Commandments. We saw that clearly. Secondly, it was the ceremonies and rituals. We saw that clearly. Thirdly, it was also the book of Psalms. We can see that clearly. And if I had gone to some other passages, I'm trying to cut down on time, but if I had gone to some other passages and read them, you would have seen clearly that the law, what was called the law, was actually the entire Old Covenant, the books and the teachings and the laws and of the Old Covenant. That is what was referred to as the law. When you come to the New Testament and you see the law, don't be misled into thinking that it's speaking of the Ten Commandments. Sometimes it is on a few occasions, but most of the time it's speaking of the entire system of the Old Covenant. When we understand this, we have a better foundation for understanding what it means to be under the law. That's the point that I want to get to. So I'll move to the next point, which is what does it mean to be under something? All right, we already looked at the umbrella and we saw that to be under the umbrella, of course, that is pretty obvious. The word under means simply to be physically below the level where something else is. When you say something is under sea level or below sea level, we mean that it is basically at a level lower than where the sea is and maybe in a dangerous position. Above means to be in point of position, elevated above the thing you're focusing on. To be elevated above or to be in location below the level means above or under. But there are other meanings to the word under. And I'm going to look at the dictionary to kind of see what the dictionary says. First of all, the Cambridge Dictionary gives us several definitions, but I picked on this one. I highlight this one because this is the one that I'm going to show you. This is the one that Paul is using when he talks about being under the law. Cambridge Dictionary. It says it is to be controlled or governed. Controlled or governed by a particular person, organization, or force. Well put. If you are controlled by a person, you're under the person. You're under your boss's jurisdiction. You're under your government. You're under your king. An organization that you work for, you're under that organization. Or you may work at a sub level of that organization. But it can also be a force, like we're all under the jurisdiction of the force of gravity. I like to use that one because everybody understands it. Although there are some people who say there's no such thing as gravity. I won't try to go there today. But the thing is, when something controls you, something governs my behavior, so I cannot fly. I can't fly. I'm governed by something that prevents me from flying. I'm under the control of that thing. I believe that force is gravity. Okay? Birds, insects, they have a way to overrule that law. They are not under the control of gravity, although to some extent they are, because if they stop flapping their wings, they are coming down. So anyway, the Cambridge Dictionary gives us this definition for the word under. And the Merriam-Webster Dictionary says the same thing. To be subject, all right? That gives you a slightly different idea than to be controlled. Means the same thing. Subject to the authority, the control, the guidance, or the instruction of something. This is perfect because this is exactly what it means to be under the law. It means you are subject to the authority of the law. You are subject to the control of the law. You are subject to the guidance of the law. And you are subject to the instruction of the law. I want you to consider, are you under the law? And remember what we saw. We saw that the law means the Ten Commandments, the sacrificial laws, the rituals and the ceremonies. It means everything that came and was a part of the package of the Old Testament. Are you subject to this? Are you under the authority, the control, the guidance, or the instruction of any of these things? Paul says we are not under the law. He compares it with a condition that he refers to as being under grace. He says if you are in this condition where you are subject to these things, you are subject to the authority, the control, the guidance, or the instruction of the law, you will be under the dominion of sin. But if you are not under the authority, the control, the guidance, or the instruction of the law, but you are led by the Spirit, then sin will not dominate your life. Let me not say too much yet because I'm going to come to the point where I really can highlight this. What does Paul mean, really? Here Paul makes it clear. In Romans 7 and verse 1, he says, know you not, brethren, for I speak to them that know the law, how that the law has what? Dominion. Dominion over a man as long as he liveth. Let's go back and look at what we saw a little earlier on. It doesn't say dominion, but it says words that mean the same. Authority, control, guidance, instruction, govern. We could use the word dominion instead of any of these other words. Paul says the law has dominion, meaning authority, control, governance. The law has control over a man as long as he lives. Now I want to illustrate that. How long will it be before you are free from this? How long will it be before you are free from this? Well, as long as you live in the country, as long as the law doesn't change, it will be as long as you live. You will never be free from this dominion, this jurisdiction, this governing authority. You will never be free from it. As long as the law remains, the only way you can be free from it is if you die. If you die, you no longer have to obey the stoplight. That's what Paul is saying. Okay? He says the law has dominion, has authority over a man as long as a person lives. So A little earlier on, you remember we read where Paul says, now we are delivered from the law because the thing that held us is dead. And I made the point, we looked at it. I could go back there, but I don't want to jump back and forth at the moment. Paul made the point that I made the point that we are delivered from the law by death. The thing that sets us free from the law is death. And Paul is using the same argument when he says here, look, the law has dominion over you as long as you live. Now, that's one place where he makes it clear that we are talking about governing authority. The law has governing authority over you as long as you live. All right? But Paul says the thing that held us is dead. Now, another place where he uses this phrase under the law makes it clear what he's talking about. In 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 20, I'm going to highlight this because this is the place in the Bible where Paul very clearly and unmistakably explains what he means about by being under the law. Now, there are about 9 places in the Bible where Paul uses the phrase under the law. He's the only person who does it. He's the only person who uses the phrase under the law. And there are 9 places where the phrase appears, all from Paul. So Paul is the one who understands what he's talking about, right? So when you go to 1 Corinthians 9, verses 20 and 21, Paul gives us a clear understanding of what he means when he says under the law. And if you ever get into a discussion with somebody on this topic, I would suggest that you go to 1 Corinthians 9, because that's a place where Paul defines what he's talking about. Paul must explain Paul. And Paul knows what he means when he says under the law. So we should accept his definitions. Even though I went to the dictionary, but obviously Paul knows what he's talking about. So Paul says, unto the Jews I became as a Jew. I became as a Jew. What does he mean by that? It means I behave like if I was a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. And then he repeats himself. But now instead of saying the Jews, he refers to them in another way. He says to them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. So when he talks about being under the law, he's talking about the Jews. Unto the Jews I became as a Jew. And the illustration on the screen with Paul cutting his hair is an illustration from the time when Paul, to please the Jews, to make them see that he was a good Jew, he took an oath and he cut off his hair, probably a Nazarite vow, and he went into the temple with some other Jews to go through certain days of purification. He went back to observing the rites of the law. And even though I believe he went too far, but he was following this principle that when he was among the Jews, because the Jews were under the law, he himself adopted to some extent the practices of the law. He kept feast days. He took a Jewish oath, and he did this because he wanted to disarm prejudice. He wanted to be able to be acceptable to the Jews so that they would listen to him more readily. You know, if we could compare it to something today, it's like if I want to reach Sunday keeping people, for example, I might start attending church on a Sunday. Or if I want to reach Adventists with the truth about God, I might start going to their Sabbath schools and maybe putting an offering in the plate, which might help them to think that I'm a good Seventh-day Adventist. Just be like them, attend their potlucks and attend their socials and their concerts, so they can be happy with me, and then they might listen to me. That it's something like this Paul is saying. But the point is that he says, he refers to the Jews, and he refers to them as those that are under the law. And he says, when I was among them, I became as a Jew. I behaved as if I also was under the law. Why? That I might gain, that I may be able to convert those that are under the law. This is how Paul was operating. But he explains that under the law means to be a Jew. The ones who were under the law were the Jews. Does it mean that they were the ones who were condemned? No, because Paul shows you another group, and he refers to this group as a group that are without the law. And who is he speaking of? If it means to be condemned, then who is it that is not condemned by the law? If you go by the law, every human being is condemned. But Paul speaks about another group that are without the law, and he's speaking about those who are not Jews. And Paul makes it clear that he's not, Paul, is not without the law in relation to God. In other words, as far as God is concerned, he's still interested in doing the things that God wants him to do. He's under the law to Christ, or under the law of Christ. He's listening to Christ and obedient to Christ. But he's without the law as far as the system of the law, the old covenant system, is concerned. When he was among the Gentiles, he did not observe that law. And you know that this was a real problem with the early Christian church, because you see them here accusing Peter that he broke the law. He was living outside of the law because he went among those who were without the law. When Peter went among the Gentiles, God instructed him to eat with them. God showed him that he was to call no man common or unclean, but it remained a problem in the church. But Paul shows you that where he was concerned, when he went among Gentiles, he behaved like Gentiles. They were without the law, they were outside of the law, and so they behaved as people outside of the law, and so did he. He did not observe those ceremonies, those sacrifices, circumcision. He never lived by the governing system of the law. Somebody might ask the question, well, didn't he keep the Ten Commandments? And I always say, I walk in harmony with the Ten Commandments, but I don't keep them. And people say it's nitpicking, but I'll explain why I say this. Because to keep the Ten Commandments suggests that I have my eyes on the commandment, that the commandments are defining and monitoring my life. And that is not true. So why do I walk in harmony with the Ten Commandments? Because I am watching Christ. Because Christ lives inside of me, and because Christ lives inside of me, I am simply responding to his impulses, and those impulses are impulses that are good. And if you are walking in a good way, you will walk in harmony with the Ten Commandments. Why? Because the commandments are just and holy and good. But if you watch the Ten Commandments, you will fail, because then you are under the law, then you are being governed by rules, then you have something outside of you that you are trying to conform to, and your very focus will cause you to be defeated. It's like I said, sometimes you see me lose my concentration and I forget what I'm going to say. Look here, you know, the harder I try to remember, the more I forget. And it's so true in so many ways. When you relax and forget about remembering, then it comes to your mind. And it's true about righteousness. The Ten Commandments keeps you, when a person is fixated on the commandments, he's fixated on morality. And when you are fixated on morality, you have your eyes on the wrong thing. Having your eyes on rules never made you anybody better, and it will not. You must be in union with the person, Jesus Christ, and your life will change. And that is the problem. So to be not under the law, Paul says when he only behaved as though he were governed by the law if he went among the Jews. When he was not among them, he went to those who are without the law. So it is clear that under the law means to be governed by the law, and to be outside of the law, to be not under the law, means to be not governed by the law. So when Paul says, sin shall not have dominion over you, sin is not going to rule your life. Why? Because you are not governed by the law. You don't have your eyes on morality. You don't have your eyes on rules. When you do, you will commit sin again and again, because rules cannot help you to be good. But we are under grace. We are not under the law. We are under grace. What is the grace of God? The grace of God practically is the Spirit of God. We are under the guidance and direction of the Spirit of God. So because we are under that government and not the other government, sin has no dominion in our lives. It does not rule nor control our lives. That is what Paul is saying. What is the opposite of being under the law? I'm just simply reinforcing my point again and again, and I'm making it clear. What is the opposite of being under the law? So Paul says to the Jews, I became as a Jew, and when I was with them, I behaved like those that are under the law. And the converse of that is to be without the law. So I made this point already, but I just want to reinforce it. The opposite of being under the law is being without the law, or in other words, to be outside of the law. In Galatians 3, verses 23 and 25, Paul says, before faith came, we were kept under the law. Meaning what? We were governed by the law before faith came. When did faith come? Faith came when Jesus Christ came. And what it means, it doesn't mean nobody had faith before. What Paul is saying is that the faith that we hold to, the faith that saves us, is our faith became reality when Jesus arrived. That's what he means when he says, before faith came. The faith he's talking about is the faith of Jesus. That is the faith that came. Before this faith came, we were kept under the law. God put us under a system of external government. We were shut up unto the faith which should afterwards be revealed. But after that faith is come, we are no longer under a schoolmaster. How can anybody mistake it? Both things. Under the law means being under a schoolmaster. We were kept under the schoolmaster because our faith had not yet become a reality. But when our faith becomes a reality, we are no longer under the schoolmaster. We are no longer under the law. We don't need a schoolmaster anymore because the law was a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. Now that we have come to Christ, the schoolmaster has done his job. His time is over. We are delivered from the schoolmaster. We are delivered from the law. And it's kind of more of the same. But the reason I'm looking at these is because Paul uses the same phrase. He says that when we were children, we were under tutors and governors. I hope you're looking at the references. Those I just read from previously was from Galatians chapter 3. This is Galatians 4. Paul says a child is treated like a servant because he's a child. He's under tutors and governors. This word under comes up over and over because I'm making the point. This is what Paul means. It's to be governed. It's to be controlled. It's to be under the authority of somebody or something. We were governed by tutors. The law was our tutor. The law was our schoolmaster until the time appointed of the Father. All of it had an expiry date. It was only to last for a time. And so he says, even so, when we were children, and I think I'm going to wrap up here. When we were children, we were in bondage under the elements of the world. Elements of the world, Paul says there was a worldly sanctuary in Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 3, I believe. He says there was a worldly sanctuary. It was the elements of the world. But God sent his son when the fullness of the time was come, made under the law. His son was made under the law. Jesus came subject to the old covenant rules. To redeem those that were under the law, he came to deliver God's people from that system of government. Jesus did not just deliver us from sin, but he delivered us from the dominion of the law. Two deliverances, brothers and sisters: deliverance from sin and deliverance from the law, because both things are tied together. If you are under the law, sin will have dominion over you. To set you free from the law, he had to set you free from, to set you free from sin. He had to set you free from the law. We could go on and on and on because this is so clear in the Bible, but it is also so wonderful when we understand. So what Paul is really talking about is two systems of government. In 2 Corinthians 3, verses 6 to 9, this is what I consider to be the great passage.
Good morning, Brother David. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to say happy birthday.
Vanessa, you're something else. Good morning, Vanessa. All right, thank you. All right, I'll forgive you for interrupting me this time. All right, thank you, Vanessa. All right. Paul says God has made us ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. He talks about the ministration of death, which was written and engraven in stones, the Ten Commandments. It was glorious, so that the children of Israel could not steadfastly behold the face of Moses for the glory of his countenance, which glory was to be done away. How shall not the ministration of the Spirit be rather glorious? For if the ministration of condemnation be glory, much more that the ministration of righteousness exceed in glory. And the key phrase here, the key word that I never caught on to for a long time, when I got it, it changed my whole understanding, is the word ministration. Ministration, what does it mean? It means the same thing as government, administration, authority, a way of service. It comes up over and over because this is Paul's point, and so many times people read it and they miss the word ministration. Paul is not saying that the commandments written and engraven in stones were abolished. Those who say it was abolished, they are wrong. Paul is not saying that we are simply free from condemnation. Those who think that this is what is being said, you are wrong. What Paul is talking about is the ministration, the ministry, the government, the system of administration. This was the problem. And Paul says this is not how we operate. It's a system of government that has passed away. The old government versus the new government. The old government was the Old Testament. The new government, of course, is the New Testament. The old government was of the letter. It was what was written and engraven on stones. The new government is of the Spirit. It is what is placed in our hearts. The old government killeth. The new government gives life. The Lord was made a life-giving spirit. He gives life. The old government was the ministration of death. It brought death, it brought condemnation, it brought despair. The new government is a ministry of life. It brings life, it brings hope, it brings victory over sin. The old government was glorious. It was. Moses' face shone with a glorious light. The new government is rather or even more glorious. That question mark doesn't belong there. The old government was done away. Notice what was done. I'm glad I put government. It's not the law that was done away. It's the old government, the system of government. The whole system is gone. Not the Ten Commandment law that was done away. The Ten Commandment law is not done away with, but it's kind of irrelevant to some extent. It's still there, but it's there as a guide to those who don't know better. For those who are in Christ, as Paul says, the law was made not made for a righteous person, but it's there still for those who don't know better. But for us who are in Christ, we have the witness inside of ourselves. We have Christ in us. That is not our system of government. We have risen above that. And the new government is one that remains. The old government is done away. The ministry of condemnation is the old government. The new one is referred to as the ministry of righteousness. The old one be glory or was glorious. We said that already. The new one is exceeds in glory. All of that is in the passage we just looked at a little earlier on. And that brings us to the end of our study for this morning, brothers and sisters. And I have to say, yeah, I think I was going on a little bit too long. But I hope that by God's grace, we have understood what I've been trying to say. The thing is that if we don't understand not just the theory of this experience, but the reality of it, when the Lord says that we're not under the law, He doesn't mean that we just have an argument that we can present to legalists. He doesn't just mean that we have an argument we can present to those who say the law is abolished. He means that we have a practical experience that we should enter into, where we understand that our walk with God is not focused on external things. We don't improve and get better because we have our eyes fixated on something outside. Our religion is in spirit and in truth. We have a relationship with the living God and His Son, and that is the basis of how we walk, of how we live, of how we exist. In Him we live and move and have our being. Christ is all in all. This is what it means in a practical way. And I trust and pray that as we have shared together today, you have been able to get this main point. So thank you for being so attentive. Thank you for hearing, brothers and sisters.